So, welcome to this Dharma talk, everyone. It's great to see you all. And today I'd like to talk about the first and the third noble truth, actually. The first truth, of course, the first noble truth of Buddhism, of course, is dukkha. And dukkha is often translated as suffering, but it's really probably the term unsatisfactoriness is more appropriate for this term. And sometimes it's called stress. So that's the first part of the talk. And the second part will be more aligned with the third truth. The four truths, of course, are there is dukkha, there is unsatisfactoriness, there is a cause for unsatisfactoriness, which is the second noble truth, which is greed, ignorance, and hatred. The third noble truth is that there is the possibility to be free, both at relative and absolute levels. And the fourth noble truth is, of course, the path. There's a way to be free. There's the path we practice. So the second part, as I said earlier, is more about that third noble truth. And I say both at relative and absolute levels, because what I mean by that is that we can find relative freedom, relative happiness, as well as absolute freedom and absolute happiness. So I'll be talking about this in the second part of this talk. So essentially, dukkha is the reality of unsatisfactoriness. And when I was a monk in Thailand, and even before I was a monk in Thailand, I used to chant what dukkha was. And it was something like this: birth, aging, sickness, and death is dukkha. Pain, grief, lamentation, and despair is dukkha. And here, when we talk about pain, we're not only talking about we're talking about emotional pain, mostly psychological pain, and also we're talking about physical pain as well. So, birth, aging, sickness, and death is dukkha. Pain, grief, lamentation, and despair is dukkha. Getting what you don't want, not getting what you want, and being parted from what you like is dukkha. And the last part is pretty refined, and it talks about it goes like this. And in fact, clinging to 5 aggregates that are called a self is dukkha. And I'll explain this later in the talk. Well, actually, I'll give details about what these 5 aggregates are right now. 5 aggregates are called khanda in Pali. They refer to 5 groups of experience that we usually identify with and call a self. These 5 groups of experiences are form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. And for most of us, this encompasses the world. We see the world through these experiences. Form refers to the 4 elements of earth, water, solid matter, this body. Earth, water, air, and fire, the elements of. Feelings refer to, as I mentioned earlier this morning, feelings refer to the hedonic tones of experience, the feeling tones of experiences, either pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. Perceptions are, sometimes it's called sanya in Pali, but they often refer to, they sometimes are referred to as memory. It's the way we recognize things. I'm picking up my mouse and I'm showing it to the camera. We all recognize this as a mouse. We wouldn't have recognized it 200 years ago. We thought, what's that? But we recognize it, and that we perceive it. So we have perceptions, and it's that recognition of something. It's a memory of something. We've learned about that through life. Mental formations are everything we think. They're the way we create the worlds. We have mentality, but also we have imagery, we have words, we have all sorts of ways we create things. And so mental formations include volitional formations, in other words, intentions to do to create something. And the last one is consciousness, which refers to the knowing of experience, simply that. And what we do is we identify with these experiences as I, mine, and myself, whereas in fact they are just changing events. And this last part of suffering that I'll talk about a little bit more in as we proceed is this clinging to the five khandha is intrinsically suffering, because we cling on to these processes as something solid and lasting, and myself. So there are three types of dukkha, and the first type, in Pali it's called dukkha, or actually dukkata. You can refer to it as suffering, the suffering of suffering, or the dukkha of dukkha. And it includes those first few sentences that I talked about before in the description of dukkha. Pain, grief, lamentation, and despair is dukkha. Birth, aging, sickness, and death is dukkha. Getting what you don't want, not getting what you want, and being parted from what you like is dukkha. They all come into that first category, or that first type of dukkha, and they are intrinsically painful or intrinsically unsatisfactory, or we certainly know it includes, like when we break our bones, or when someone dies and they're left behind. This natural, it's like the first arrow of experience. When we talk about the first and second arrow, we're talking about things that are just naturally suffering, like when we become ill, and as we grow older, often there's a lot of suffering in aging. So just in a personal example of this, I started to talk about this earlier this morning, and this is the reality of physical pain, for example. And as I mentioned earlier, I went on a retreat probably about 5 weeks ago, and I intended to stay for about 3 weeks on this retreat. It was a self-retreat. I was just by myself. I was, cooking for myself and so on. And the first 5 days was great. I'm going along very well. I usually practice in the form of serenity first and then insight. And, serenity means developing samadhi, developing a concentrated mind, then using that concentrated mind to look into experiences. And the 4 heart qualities are practices related to serenity meditation, or tranquility meditation, or sometimes it's called calm meditation. So I was doing that, and I was sitting probably about, maybe 6 or 8 hours a day. And I was sitting in 2-hour periods. Like I'd stay still for 2 hours. And everything was going really great. I thought it was, this would be a good retreat. I'm off to a good start. Then on the 6th day, I woke up in agony in my neck. And I went down to sit, and I couldn't sit without having extreme pain. I couldn't lie down without extreme pain. I went walking and I had extreme pain. And the pain would kind of radiate down my arm and so on. It was really, really disheartening. And I think I mentioned that probably about 20 years ago, or a long time ago, I practiced solely within the insight tradition of Mahasi Sayadaw. And in that tradition, we learn about the 4 foundations of mindfulness, or the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And I mentioned this morning that on one retreat I went to Burma with a Sayadaw of Janaka, actually. And I stayed 6 weeks in that retreat. And my primary object was pain, because that's what was happening for me. I just felt pain, physical pain, pain in my back, pain in my knees, standing up, I had pain. So it was kind of pain all the time, but it would stop when I lay down. And it was quite pleasant when I was eating my meals, and if I shifted my posture, I could move from the pain. So that was okay. But during that time, and I mentioned this morning, but I'll repeat it. Sayadaw Janaka, we would have daily reports, or it might have been bi-daily in the retreat in Burma. But either way, you'd come up for your retreat, for your reporting, and when the person in front of you left, you go in, and Sayadaw would say, "Yogi, report your experience." And I would say, Sayadaw, I've got pain here, I've got pain there, and the pain is really intense. And you go, "Oh, very good, very good, very good." Pain is the key to the door of Nibbana. Thanks, Sayadaw. But yes, it was a very helpful experience. At that time, I could concentrate, and I could differentiate between the physical sensations and the painful Vedana. It's a feeling tone. And it was quite, in the long run, it was quite liberating. Mind you, I came back very skinny and kind of, because we had, just that retreat food and before midday and so on, I was pretty skinny. My partner thought I looked like I was, she said, "You look like you have cancer, Malcolm," because my hair was really short. But nonetheless, it was a positive retreat. But on the retreat that I was on 5 weeks ago, I couldn't get that concentration. I couldn't slip into that way of seeing things. And for me, it was just unpleasant, really difficult. I felt like I was kind of forced to go back into that path of pain. But I realized that I shouldn't just sit through it. I realized I should do something about it. So I went to a physiotherapist and got some exercises and so on. But it wasn't improving, and I eventually decided that I should come home and get an MRI and see what's going on. So I'm saying this because this is that first type of suffering. It's the inevitable difficulties that arise with life, and it's the first arrow type of suffering. Now, the first arrow, second arrow story comes from a teachings from the Buddha. He actually calls them darts, and he talks about the first dart as being inevitable suffering, the suffering that we have with dukkha, this first type of suffering. And he said it's, you can't do much about the first type of suffering except for, doing what you do, and, managing it well and doing what you need to do, taking care of it and so on. And, all the mindfulness in the world may not necessarily get rid of or eliminate that type of suffering. However, there's a second type of suffering. There's a second arrow. It's like you're in a battlefield, you get shot by an arrow, and then you get another arrow. And the other arrow is more like your reactions to the experience. And the reactions to the experience include, thoughts about it, stories about it, frustrations with it, feeding into greed, ignorance, and hatred around it. I know I've certainly had my dose of that. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story about that in a little while. But so I'll tell you now. The other day, I had my MRI, and I found out what it was, and it's narrowing of intervertebral discs, and it's bone spurs, and originating from a congenital kyphosis, a congenital meaning that I've had it since birth. I've got this kyphosis, which is my back bends out where it should bend in. It's like natural, rather than the natural S shape, I have a deformation, I suppose you could call it. Like it bends out, so it kind of twists my spine up in sort of strange directions. So it's been developing for a long time. But when I did an AI search about the causes and conditions of these problems, it said AI highlighted factors like congenital traits, aging, and sitting still for prolonged periods of time, believe it or not. And they made examples here. These are the 3 examples they said, such as working out of the computer, especially with a computer neck, for long hours, driving a car for long hours, and the last example they made was sitting in meditation for long hours. So, anyway, I've been forced to confront the reality of aging. I mean, I'm 70 years old now, and the last talk I gave here on these online days of meditation was about the realities of aging and illness, and here it is. It's an example of dukkha. So coming back to this second arrow, I noticed that last Saturday I sat down at the computer to write a Dharma talk for today. And there I was, no matter how high or low I made my desk, I couldn't find any comfort. And in fact, when I reached the mouse to do it and tried to type on the typing board, I would have a pain coming down my arm and into my shoulder, around the back of my neck. I was getting very frustrated. And I was standing at the table, at the computer for a moment, and then I'd go over into my lounge and say, I swore. I won't say what I swore, but I swore. And I go, and I eventually went inside my house and I said to my partner, can I complain? Can I complain? And I started to swear. I can't do this. I can't ride my bike. I can't sit at the computer. What am I going to do? How am I going to work? How am I going to see people online? How am I going to sit and do this? I'm running a retreat, an online retreat in a couple of months. How am I going to do that? How am I going to see my clients online? How am I going to see my clients face to face? I was really frustrated. I was really angry. And then you go into this, and then with that, you go this sort of depression. Oh, this is it. This is it for now. I'll never ride my bike again. I've been unable to drive a car because it involves this kind of lifting up. My head is kind of looking up. I'll never be able to drive anywhere. I'll never be able to travel anywhere. And the second arrow is the stories we put on to the original pain. So that afternoon, I eventually kind of calmed down a bit. I vented my anger to my partner, and I pulled up I've got this chair it's a camping chair, but it folds out to a reclining situation. And I just laid on the chair and I looked at the clouds for about an hour. And then I eventually came back to my computer and I turned on AI and I recorded a Dharma talk. And from that Dharma talk, I put it back into AI and I said, look, this long Dharma talk, can you please make it a summary of it to make it at least less than 2,000 words? So it gave me a 1,700 word Dharma talk, and that's what I'm doing today. So it's over here. So you might see me looking at it every now and then. It's just over. It's off screen. So that's what we mean by the first and narrow approach. And, just to say a little bit about liberation here, we can change the way we perceive, or maybe, yes, perceive, I guess, and also the way we respond to our pain. There's physical pain, and then there's the resistance to it. And of course, we need to do things when we have pain. We need to move and we need to follow what our body's telling us. And I found that the more resistance I have to it, the more anger I have towards it, the more depression I have towards it, the more aversion, because anger and depression are the same sort of ill will. That's a major hindrance. The more I suffer. I did see an equation, and they use this equation in mindful self-compassion. Some of our practitioners are training in mindful self-compassion. It's a really great formula, actually, and I wish I could write it for you. But it's like there's pain times resistance equals suffering. So if you take out the resistance, there's nothing there. So pain times 0 equals 0. So you might have the pain, the physical pain, but if you don't have the resistance or the anger or the frustration and the sheer aversion to it, the hatred towards it, then you have no suffering. So that's something that I've discovered. Classically, it was a classic example. And I'm mindful of it, but I took away the fact that I've really got to just be kind to it. In fact, I noticed that when I can be kind to it, when I can be less aversive to it, when I can treat it in a way where I'm not creating a future about it, like a future of failure and so on, then it's a lot easier to manage. So the second type of suffering is called, I won't give you the Pali, but it's the suffering of change. The fact that pleasant things, pleasant experiences, states of health, and comfortable conditions are inherently unstable. When favorable conditions inevitably end or decay, the resulting transition brings dissatisfaction, disappointment, or grief. It's the suffering of change. It's like going on a holiday to your favourite spot and everything's really great, and eventually having to come back to work, or losing your employment, or losing your social status. I've noticed this since I've semi-retired. I'm not getting as many emails anymore. People aren't referring to me, and nobody's really interested in me. Or you go downtown and you see all the other old people going to Woolworths and shopping and hanging out, and you're joining the old people's club, which is what I am now. And there's a sense of loss of status or your identity. So that's the dukkha of change. The fading of youth and physical vigor. Coming back to my current examples, I've definitely noticed, and this is what I talked about last Dharma talk, all these things seem to happen. I had an effect. Last time I gave a Dharma talk, I had something called paronychia, and my thumbnail was infected. I don't know if you can see it now. I've lost half of it now. It's better now, but I'm just waiting for the new one to go. So things happen. And one of my friends said, my friend is 83 years old. He said, when you get old, things change. You get pain, but it doesn't seem to go. It just kind of lasts and changes to something else. Something else comes up. So, look, my partner sent me a lovely link to something on Facebook, and it was five suggestions for graceful aging. And I thought they were really good, so I listened to them last night and wrote them down. The first suggestion is, first thing they say, however, is aging is natural. We all age. It's inevitable, unless we get killed somehow in our early years. It's natural to age, and the mind determines whether it is graceful or a situation or frustrated. The mind determines whether there's a deep acceptance of it or a deep rejection and a condemnation. And in this little YouTube, this old person fighting with the realities of aging. So the first suggestion they make is accept what you can't change. I thought that was a good suggestion. And I know Harvey might be writing this down because I was thinking of you, Harvey. I know what you got your little project. Accepting what you can't change. The second one was to stay curious, continue to learn. The body will age, but the mind can continue to learn. And I know something wonderful about what's happening to me right now is that I can still play guitar. And I have to sit up in a really good posture to do it. And I can't see the fretboard when I've got this new set up to play the guitar. So I have to learn where all the notes are on the fretboard without looking at them. So this is a kind of good thing. And because I'm tipping my neck towards my left, I can see it. I can see the music I'm playing. So isn't that wonderful? I'm staying curious. I'm learning something. And another thing I'm doing is I'm focusing on what I'm trying to focus. This is a suggestion for aging, is to focus on what you still have rather than having remorse and regret about, or having sadness about what you've lost. I mean, as we get older, I've been watching some old people, and suddenly I'm like that now. I can't jump on my bike and ride around with lots of vigor and do all sorts of things. I can't run anymore. But I can walk. It's fantastic. Even though walking still has a bit of pain, but I can move my arm around and it's great. So it's focus on what you have and gratitude for what you can still do and still enjoy. So it's staying curious. It's accepting what you can't change, staying curious. Another one is focusing on what you have and gratitude about it. Another one is letting go of the burdens, letting go of your burdens and regrets, letting them all go, rather than carrying them around on your shoulders all the time. And the last suggestion they made on this, I think it was, psychologists have researched this and they found 5 suggestions that are good for aging. Keep a sense of purpose and live wisely. Isn't that great? Really cool. I'll be talking a little bit more about this, these suggestions, not specifically, but in reference to mundane and genuine happiness, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So that's the second type of suffering, the suffering of change. And the third type of suffering is the suffering of conditioned existence. And this type of suffering is encompassed with that last statement that I mentioned earlier about the 5 khandha, the 5 aggregates. It is a form of suffering that is inherent in all conditioned phenomena. Because everything in our physical and psychological existence comprises of 5 aggregates, these 5 khandha that I mentioned earlier. These 5, form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, or volitional creations, and consciousness. Because these 5 khandha, or 5 aggregates, are impermanent, they're conditional. They're reliant on causes and conditions. None of it can be ultimately secure. It can't give us ultimate security. If we cling to these five khandhas, we're aging, we're dying, and at the time of death, five khandha fall apart. I'm not sure what happens after death, but we're not taking any of the khandha with us. We're not taking our body with us when we die, definitely. Some people say we take our mind, but I wonder about that. What we do take with us is our actions and the results of those actions, like a continuum, because that's the law of karma. But it's not like we're taking our personality with us. Some people may contest that, but it's like just one moment leads to another moment, leads to another moment. And when we die, the five aggregates break up. So, the fundamental error we make about these five aggregates is misperceiving these feelings, these fleeting conditional processes, as a fixed I, me, and mine. And even something as mundane as needing to continually adjust one's posture stems from this conditional dukkha. It's called sankhara dukkha. So anyway, how do we deal with dukkha? Well, you've often heard me talk about the practice. You've often heard me talk about the Four Noble Truths, and that's the basic framework. The basic framework of the Four Noble Truths is that it's like two cause-effect relationships. You have dukkha, or suffering, and its causes, which is greed, ignorance, and hatred at its roots, and freedom from suffering and its causes. First and the second truth, suffering and its causes. The third and the fourth truth, freedom from suffering and its causes. And the causes of freedom, of course, is letting go of that which causes us suffering. When we can let go and release craving, clinging, grasping, becoming ignorance, and so on, then we short-circuit this cycling of suffering. We short-circuit the tendency to feed into our dukkha. And it's like what I was describing with the psychological resistances of frustration and catastrophic narratives built around my story of being disabled by my pain, which I hope I can manage in some way. I'm doing all right so far. I'm giving a Dharma talk, and it's okay. I'm not too distracted by the pain, but this is, as we explained earlier, this psychological resistance, the greed, ignorance, and hatred is the cause of suffering. So when we can let that go, then we can experience freedom from suffering. And I mentioned earlier there's different levels of freedom. We can have relative freedom from suffering, or maybe you could call that relative happiness. And I'm going to credit Alan Wallace. I listened to a Dharma talk a couple of weeks ago by Alan Wallace, and he talked about mundane and genuine happiness. Now, mundane happiness is the type of happiness that we can have in the world. It's like a relative happiness. It's still the happiness. And genuine happiness is more a happiness that we can have from our practice, on our practicing the path, which is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, which is actually divided into three components. We have ethics, we have mental development, usually called samadhi in this case, And we have wisdom. So these 8 factors are involved in that. So these are the ways we find freedom. We cultivate this, and in cultivating this ethics, mental development, and wisdom, we let go of the causes of suffering. And we find the reality of nibbana eventually. But as I was mentioning, there's different types of happiness, and nibbana is the ultimate happiness. So I just want to go through the various types of worldly happiness, and just emphasize that it's worldly happiness or mundane happiness is not bad. It's great. It is wholesome and supportive. However, as Dr. Alan Wallace defines it, he says it is stimulus-driven well-being. In other words, a pleasure or a well-being that relies on something in the world, an external condition, object, or a sensory input. So, Alan gave a great Dharma talk, and if you want to have that Dharma talk, I'm happy to send you the link. But he talked about a sutta that he read. He was referring to the early Buddhist suttas for all the way through this talk, and he talked about the Ananya Sutta, where the Buddha outlines 4 types of mundane happiness for lay people. The first type of happiness the Buddha outlined was ownership. And this is the security derived from wealth or property acquired through honest, right livelihood. And an example of this, and I'm happy to say that I'm one of these examples, I own my own home and I have a stable superannuation fund. So even when I retire, I've got money to support me. So that, I must admit, that gives me a certain sort of happiness, a certain sort of security. A lot of people, many people I know, don't have that. The second type of happiness is enjoyment. So it's the pleasure from using, enjoying, and sharing wealth generously with others. And this is an example of this is being able to have a holiday. I know probably about 99.9% of people in the world can't afford to take a holiday, I reckon. I don't know. I'm not sure if I probably got my percentages wrong. But it's not easy to have the money to just go on a holiday or buy what you need. Even in Australia, I know that a lot of people can't even go to the dentist, and they're putting off going to the dentist because they can't afford to go to the dentist. I can buy a stand-up desk. I've got enough money to buy a stand-up desk. So I've got the happiness of having a stand-up desk, which is this desk can go up and down depending on the height. It costs a bit of money, but I had it. I bought it. Another type of happiness here is the enjoyment is the capacity to donate or to give to others. And I'm fortunate to say that I have that capacity as well. And I know many of you have that capacity. You sitting on this, listening to this Dharma talk, have that capacity to have enough to give to others. So that's a particular type of enjoyment. It's a worldly enjoyment. The next one he's talking about here, the worldly or mundane enjoyment, is debtlessness. The peace of mind from owing no financial or moral debt. That's really cool. That's really good. I mean, I enjoy that happiness as well. And any moral debts I have, any remorse of actions that I've done in the past, I've endeavoured to rectify them or amend them. This moral debt's interesting. It's about maybe we've done some unhealthy or unwise actions in the past. And if you've listened to any of my Dharma talks, you would have heard me talk about a time when I did something quite harmful for a relationship that I was in. And you also heard me talk about how eventually after 30 years, 40 years, I went to my ex-wife and I apologized and I asked for forgiveness. And with that, it was like, it wasn't quite like making amends. It was making amends. That was really important for my ex-partner, to hear my apologies and ask for forgiveness. So it felt like I was paying back a moral debt, if that makes sense. So examples of this one, debtlessness, is being being free from financial liability, and also expressing remorse, seeking forgiveness, and making amends for any problems we have, any harm we may have caused another. And also forgiving ourselves. You've heard me talk about forgiveness. And that's a particular type of happiness. It's a worldly happiness. The last of the worldly happiness is blamelessness. And this is the refined satisfaction born of unblemished, harmless conduct in body, speech, and mind. And it's an example of this is just living with a clear conscience, knowing that what we've done, our actions have not caused any harm. Sometimes our actions do cause harm, but our intentions have been harmless, if that makes sense. And this type of blamelessness is also in the genuine happiness categories as well. So worldly happiness, mundane happiness, relates to things being stimulus driven. But in this case, when Alan Wallace talks about genuine happiness, it does not depend on favourable external stimuli. It arises internally from mental development and spiritual practice, and aligned with a spiritual practice or just living in alignment with that the three divisions of the Eightfold Path: ethics, mental development, and wisdom. So ethical well-being, which is called sila in Pali, well, the well-being is not called sila, the practice is called sila. It's the ethical practice. It's derived from moral integrity, and harmless behavior leaves our mind calm, confident, and free from remorse. Our conscience is clear. And ethics is also the foundation for effective meditation practice. Interestingly, the ethics, the blamelessness that we mentioned in the worldly happinesses, that's also mentioned here too, because when you live ethically, you live a blameless life, a life that is free from that bad conscience about doing something wrong. It's free, and it provides the foundation for mental development. In other words, foundation for meditation. So meditative well-being, and you've often heard me talking about samadhi, and it's the meditative well-being arises from attentional balance and mental stillness. This arises also, samadhi also arises from having some respite or freedom from the hindrances. I don't know if you've often heard me talk about that. One time I was on a retreat with Venerable Sujata a long time back. Oh, no, sorry, not a long time back. It was only a couple of months ago. And I had a little session with him. I was just talking with him. And I said that when I first started meditation, when I was about 19, I was endeavoring to achieve the jhanas, at that early age. And Venerable Sujato said, but I was terribly unsuccessful. I could hardly concentrate my mind on anything. And Venerable Sujato said, well, that term trying is in it. That's the key. Of course, you're trying to get something, you're not going to get it, because that's a hindrance to achieving the jhanas, if you can call them achieving. That term is probably not quite right. It's more like letting go and allowing the jhanas to arise, I think. Because as the Buddha emphasizes, Bhikkhu Sujato mentioned or said, jhanas arise from letting go of the hindrances. When there's no more hindrances there's jhana. There's a concentrated mind. So this concentrated mind is free from the hindrances, and it also produces deep states of jhanas or meditative states, and it's characterized by joy, happiness, tranquility, peace, contentment, and so on. So that's a genuine happiness. That's an unworldly happiness, if you want to call it like that, a spiritual happiness. And the third category of these genuine happinesses, if you can call them like that, is a supreme well-being born from directly seeing reality as it is. Seeing things the way they actually are, rather than clouding them and projecting our perceptions on them. Rather than projecting our delusions on things, we actually see things free from the mental distortions. And this is a supreme well-being, and allows one to remain present with the experience without converting to first arrow physical pain, without converting first arrow physical pain into second arrow suffering. So, of course, the ultimate freedom is nibbana. The ultimate genuine happiness is nibbana. And nibbana is the ultimate cessation of dukkha. And it's neither annihilation nor eternalism. It is an unconditioned reality, experienced here and now, and it's beyond worldly grasping. As Ajahn Chah describes it, it is the reality of non-clinging. When there's no cause of suffering, there's no suffering. Nibbana is talked about in many different ways, and I've often mentioned it in Dharma talks, some of these ways. But today I'd like to mention something, I'd like to mention a sutta, and something that the Buddha said, and it's the Mogaraja Manava Pucca Sutta. And there's a student called Mogaraja who asks the Buddha how to view the world he asks the Buddha, how can one view the world so the king of death cannot see him, cannot see one? Now, the king of death refers to Mara, and also refers to that, Kilesa, because Nibbana is also called the deathless. It's deathless because it doesn't arise, it isn't born, and therefore it doesn't die. So how does one view the world so the king of death does not see him, or one, in this case, one? So this is what the Buddha said. Look upon the world as empty, Mogaraja, always mindful. Removing any view of self overcomes death. Looking upon the world in this way, the king of death sees you not. And here the Buddha refers to the world as defined by the five aggregates. When we cease identifying with form, feeling, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness, as I, me, or myself, death can no longer locate or claim us. Isn't that cool? And there's something, there's another reference to Nibbana here. It's like there was another Dharma talk, a sutta, where someone asked, where does the end of the earth come? Where does the end of earth, water, fire, and air come? And the Buddha described this as consciousness finding no footing. So it's like footing is a support for grasping. So in this case, the state of release is described as finding no footing or support for grasping. And in the unattached, in the unestablished consciousness, which is the enlightened consciousness, the awakened consciousness, attachment to the aggregates is severed. And consciousness has no standing point. It has no footing. Without a foothold to anchor, clinging consciousness is fully liberated. That's pretty cool, isn't it? So in another sutta, this is the Kevada Sutta, the Buddha explains that the primary physical elements, earth, water, fire, and air, find no footing in the unestablished radiant awareness of Nibbana, where sensory identification ceases, physical conditions no longer hold their sway over the mind. Cool. So, you can have physical pain and you can identify with it, you can struggle with it, you can plead for it, please take it away. It's not fair. But if you can see it in a way where it is just dukkha vedana, it's just painful feeling tones, and not identify with it as I, mine, and myself, not make all those stories, then you can find liberation. And I'm not pretending I'm liberated from dukkha, but to the extent that I can practice that, there's some freedom. So I'm just going to read my conclusion here. While physical discomfort and external changes are unavoidable aspects of the conditioned mind and body, suffering, or dukkha, is not mandatory. To the extent that we can let go of clinging to the five aggregates and stop fueling the second arrow of resistance, we access both relative peace in daily life and the ultimate unshaken freedom of Nibbana. So thanks for listening, everyone. May we all wake up and realize true freedom. Thank you.